Hey guys, how are you? Today I'd like to visit with you a little bit about the Torah portion called Lech Lecha. That's found in the book of Genesis or Bereshit, starting in chapter 12. I used to do like a live stream teaching each week, and it's been a while since I've done that. Normally, for probably the past couple of 2 or 3 years, I've just been doing sort of topic-oriented videos and that sort of thing, and I like doing them, but this week I thought I'd do something a little bit different and maybe just go through and explore a little bit this Torah portion about the patriarch Abraham. And so we were introduced to him actually at the end of the portion in Noah, the portion that was last week. And it might be good to just take a second, because I always think that this is really cool, to add a little bit of context and flavor to this by kind of showing how Genesis basically begins in Genesis chapter 1 with a broad overview, more of a panoramic lens, if you will. And then the lens begins to tighten up and we begin to get a closer shot, more detail, like in chapter 2. And as it goes on, then we began to sort of get the camera pins in a little bit on Noah, and then even more so on Abraham, kind of as we go. And so a lot of time has passed really from the first Torah portion in Genesis to now, has been almost 2,000 years. So like, because the Bible is so precise and detailed about genealogies, many times we're able to go through and put things together and figure out how long it was, often from one person to another or one event to another. And so like in Genesis, where it starts out, and it'll say something like, when Adam was 130 years old, he begot Seth. And he lived 800 years, and he died at the age of 930 years old. And so we can, by taking all of these genealogies, we can kind of figure out how much time has passed. So like, from the time of Adam, now as we get more into the story of Abraham in the Torah portion Lech Lecha, we see that Abraham was born in the year 1948. And so that's pretty amazing for you guys who are students of history or the Bible. But in modern times, the modern state of Israel was reborn in the year 1948 likewise. So just as there's this axiom or an idiomatic expression in Judaism that basically says that the things that occur in the lives of the fathers or the patriarchs portends that which is going to occur with their descendants or their seed. And so, in other words, that which happens to the fathers happens to the children, and also that which happens to Israel happens to the Messiah. So we see these patterns and motifs and mosaics that continue to unfold as we go. And Genesis, basically, as the name would imply, is a book about beginnings. And so we're going to see a number of seeds early on in this book that are then we're going to see the outgrowth and fruit of that later on. And so with both words and letters and concepts and all of this stuff and people and nations, it's pretty amazing once you look at this stuff a while and a lot of the dots begin to connect. And so I thought that was pretty cool, that from Adam until the birth of Abraham is 1948 years, 1948, and then from the last Adam, or Yeshua's time, approximately, to our time, that Israel became a nation again in the year 1948. So the name of this Torah portion is called Lech Lecha, and it's two words, and both of the words are spelled the exact same way, with the Lamed and the Kaf of the Hebrew alphabet. And so it's just an adjustment with the vowels, basically. And that first word, lech, means to walk or journey. And so basically, a lot of this narrative is going to be, and the ones coming up with Isaac and Jacob, and even as we get into the book of Exodus and Numbers, that we will see that it's a story about people's journeys. And so as we look at this archetypally and psychologically, there's an opportunity, I think, to see your journey in these stories as well, and recognize that a lot of the same challenges maybe that you're facing were faced by Abraham and his descendants. And so it's this idea of walk. And so some of you may be familiar with the term halakha, that means the way one walks, often associated with how you carry out Jewish law. So that's a term that's that you might be familiar with. Now, the second part of that word, Lech Lecha, we see the lamed at the beginning of a word. Often that's going to indicate two or four. And then the ka part on that word means you or yourself. So, and it's interesting how some of the sages interpret this phrase Lech Lecha. Like the commentator Rashi interpreted it as go for yourself. Because let me just read it in English here. In Genesis chapter 12, starting verse 1, Hashem, or the Lord, said unto Abram, go for yourself from the land, from your relatives, and from your father's house to the land that I will show you. And so this is where we get the name of the Torah portion and those words, Lech Lecha, of go for yourself. Some of the translations might say get to yourself or go forth or something like that. And so I think it's interesting how when we look at this on a little bit deeper level, Rashi, as I said, he basically interprets it as go for your own benefit or for your growth or for your own development. It's going to be for your good to obey God and go where he wants to send you and take you. He wants to take you to this next level and put you into a position of flow and blessing if you will follow him and walk with him. And in the Midrash, there's a Midrash in Zohar that says go to yourself. They interpret it as go to yourself. In other words, return to your true essence or your higher self. And so it's kind of neat. You know, back in the 60s, I guess it was, that people would talk about going to find yourself and that sort of idea. I think that we see here that by Abraham seeking the path of God on his journey, that he's actually going to discover himself, and particularly his more authentic and higher self. Also, in the Hasidic reading or understanding of this is leave behind your lower self or ego. And so Abraham's journey symbolizes transcending the egoic identity. And so it's pretty interesting to me, because I've always gotten into this sort of thing, looking at things beyond the surface, and hopefully you enjoy that sort of stuff as well. As we look further in this, first of all, in this first verse, so Lech Lecha, go for yourself from the land, or your relatives, and from your father's house to the land that I will show you. In the last week's Torah portion, it basically ends with the story of Babel, the Tower of Babel and all of that in Genesis chapter 11. And so that's sort of the backdrop for now what's going on as we get more into the story of Abraham. And those people, if you remember, that it says they were all of one language, one speech, and of one mind. They were unified in their goals and in their endeavors, and God basically said, hey, if I don't go down and disrupt their plans here, that nothing will be impossible to them, because basically they're unified. And that's a whole nother theme there, but I think an important one to maybe at least touch upon real quickly is that we're confronted immediately in the book of Genesis with dichotomies, with various types of dualities and duplicitous, maybe even we could say, symbols and concepts and that sort of thing. And so there's things that are opposites that are complementary, such as day and night often can be, male and female, the waters above, the waters below. So we've got these opposites that are contrasted, but the idea is that there's to be a separation of these things for a time, and then a synthesis of these forces back together again. Now, that's sort of the opposite, or the light side of what would be the shadow or negative side of it when we look at the people of Babel in the land of Shinar there, that they were, the word Babel, that means confusion, comes from the root word that means a mixture. Now we're talking about something that ought not to be mixed. We have a video, or some videos that I know that we've discussed some of this stuff. I think it's called Unholy Mixtures. If you're interested, I'll try to remember to put a link down below. But the Bible deals with a lot of these examples of things that should not be mixed, such as wool and linen, or plowing with an ox and a donkey together, planting your field with diverse types of seeds that will defile the garden or your land. A male that dons women's clothing, what used to be called a transvestite, and often now is referred to as just strictly trans or transgender and that sort of thing. It's a unholy mixture, and so that is more of a Babylonian kind of concept or archetype, as opposed to on the holy side of things being in light side separated and then coming together as one, as a unity. So like it says, and Adam knew his wife. So Adam came together with his opposite or his counterpart, and it said, and he knew her. They became one. And so that is became one flesh. That's the essence of to know in Hebrew, or knowledge, is to become one with. And so that's when God blesses things, is that when the counterparts, the proper counterparts or complements, come together as a unity and become one, then that's something that God can begin to bless. And so there has to be an action that takes place in this space-time realm. And so I think that maybe that's a lot of times why prayers maybe aren't answered, because there has to be, I think in most cases, maybe in all cases, an action for God to bless or react to before something will happen. That's something that maybe I would like to get into in the future, maybe do a video on that concept of the idea that there has to be an initiation from below before there can be a reaction or an answer from above. So like the idea of lightning, let's say. Lightning, we can have cloud to ground lightning, we can have cloud to cloud lightning, and also we can have ground to cloud lightning as well. And so usually in the scripture, sometimes there will be something that's initiated from above maybe, but I think most of the time it's initiated from below. And maybe in all cases, to some extent, that it has to be done that way. For example, the famous verse, if my people who are called by my name will do A, B, and C. In other words, if there's an action or initiation from below, then from above there will be a reciprocal or positive flow in exchange for what was initiated from below. So in other words, kind of like the ground to cloud lightning example. So if from below there's an initiation, then there can be a positive response from above. So we're going to see this really in a number of places with the life of Abraham and others. And it says that you're to leave your land, your relatives, and your father's house. And again, this is in contrast to the people of Babel, because the people of Babel are confusion or unholy mixture empire or kingdom of this world, as opposed to the laws and people of the kingdom of God. It says that they were trying to make a name for themselves. That was part of the a big part of the purpose of building this tower, building the city and building the tower to reach to heaven. And there's a lot of really cool stuff in the whole story of the Tower of Babel. And so they had this big building project that brought everybody together in one purpose, one speech, one goal, to make their name great, and for a paranoia about being scattered. And so ironically, really, the thing that they tried to achieve and tried to avoid failed, because they were doing it for the wrong reasons, the wrong motivation. Avraham, in contrast, here he's still Abram, or exalted father. He's told to leave his land, his relatives, and his father's house, and then God's going to bless him and multiply him and make his name great. A lot of the things that were sought with a incorrect motive by the people of Babel is now being promised to Abraham and is going to be fulfilled in him and his seed later on. But actually what he's being asked to do so that this can happen is the exact opposite of what normally you would expect. When someone, especially in those days, leaves the stability of their land, of their culture, and what they're familiar with, and their family, their friends, and leaves all that behind, it's likely going to result in you dying in obscurity, remaining small as a people. If you survive at all, there's probably a good chance that you're going to be wiped out, or if not wiped out, maybe absorbed by some other culture around you, rather than being separate and growing into a great nation. So actually what he's being, logically, if Abraham would have just merely dealt with it from a rational or logical point of view, what he's being asked to do, the result of that would be normally the opposite of what God is promising to him. But he believed God, as you know, and it was accounted to him for righteousness' sake. Also, I might just mention that there's references in the New Testament to the children of Abraham, or we could say the fruit of Abraham, the fruit of that tree of Abraham, if you will. They have the same faith as Abraham, because the fruit, basically in the fruit, you're going to find the same seed over and over again as this thing replicates itself. So within the seed is the whole plan or holographic image of the tree, and then as it produces fruit again, it's going to have that same seed that replicates itself. Same is true on a spiritual level, that Abraham and his seed are it's going to produce the same fruit as Abraham. So it's going to have the same faith, the faith of Abraham, and also the works of Abraham, as we see. And so God continues here, and he says that I'm going to make you a great nation, if you'll do these things, I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who curses you I will curse, and all the families of the earth shall bless themselves by you. And so you might be familiar with this passage here that talks about, I will bless those who bless you, and those who curse you I will curse. And I think that this is very relevant for the time that we're in now, because especially when we go in there and begin to look into the Hebrew of these words. Now, the word for bless there, God says that those who bless you, it's going to go back to the word barakah. The word barakah, or blessing, deals with this idea of the knee, as in part of the leg there, the knee as in kneeling, and essentially a flow, an energetic flow of blessing or abundance being channeled from above down to below, is kind of the idea of barakah, or blessing. And so God says that those that bless you in your seed, Abraham, which this is going to be explained further as this is reiterated later with Abraham and his offspring, that it means it's not just talking about the person Abraham, but it's talking about his descendants that are going to follow after him, that those who curse them are going to be cursed. Those who bless them are going to be blessed. Now, when it says that those that bless you, or in your seed, will be blessed, it's the same Hebrew word barakah. So there's going to be a flow of abundance, positive energy, if you will, for those who are blessing Abraham and his seed. Contrary-wise, those who curse his seed, Abraham and his seed, will be cursed, but now it's going to be a different word. So the word for when it talks about anybody who curses Abraham, or those that come from Abraham that are of him, it's going to be the word kalah. If somebody kalahs Abraham or his descendants, they're going to be cursed. Now here it's two different words for curse. Same words for blessing that God is going to reciprocate for those who bless Israel, but it's a different word for curse. So when the people are doing it, if you curse anybody who curses you or your descendants, Abraham, now that's going to be again the word kalah, that basically can mean and does mean to despise, to make light of, or diminish, of devalue. So someone who devalues or is speaking light of the descendants of Abraham are going to be cursed. And so think about today, how many people, and frankly, I've been very surprised, shocked, and disappointed with a lot of people, because I didn't expect to see the rise of anti-Semitism among a number of the people that I have. And I realize that I'm not equating criticism. If there's legitimate criticisms of the government of Israel, I'm not saying that you can't criticize, or it's not proper at times for them to be critiqued or criticized. God himself did, and he sent prophets of old often to point out things that the leaders or people of Israel were doing wrong, but it was always with the goal of loving correction, to where they would adjust their path and repent, show authentic teshuvah, and return and realign with God's will. That was the purpose of that. A lot of what we're seeing now is not that, and people can call it what they want, but when you're motivated daily to rail against this people, against the nation of Israel and against Jews, you're not just criticizing the government or leaders. You are operating by a dark spirit, the spirit of the serpent, the spirit of the dragon, as we see in Revelation chapter 12, and we basically see this in a number of places. And so, and notice this, that so many of the people that spend, seems like day after day, bringing railing accusations against the nation of Israel, horrific atrocities and corruption and bad things are going on with other countries, and it's crickets often. They have no interest, apparently, in criticizing many of these other governments or people. It's always this people. And it seems like the one thing that many of the people on the right and on the left agree with is that they hate Israel and they hate Jews. Some of them will not frame it that way, but definitely as you begin to listen to them, that is what the spirit, they're not saying what they're saying because of a concern or love for the nation of Israel and the Jewish people. They are in some cases doing worse than Kalah here, or just diminishing or speaking or belittling. In a lot of cases, it's absolutely railing accusations. And by the way, that is Hasatan, Satan. That's what that means, is adversary. And it's basically a legal word. So it's sort of the opposite of an advocate or defense attorney. It's like a prosecutor that day and night brings railing accusations against people, and usually this one. This is who he has always had in his sights. The children of Abraham, the children of Israel. He wants to destroy them, and both sides. That's the one thing, for all of the other differences that conservatives and liberals may have. It's really scary what I've been seeing really in the last couple of months, particularly since the death of Charlie Kirk, which, by the way, is being blamed on Israel and being blamed on Trump and a lot of people without any evidence. And so anything that bad happens, often the first people that get the blame are the government of Israel or the Jews. And again, I'm not defending everything that the government of Israel does or anything like that, but a lot of this criticism I don't think is fair or objective criticism, but I think that it is motivated by a very dark, wicked spirit. It is not motivated by the Spirit of God. It's by another malevolent spirit. So, didn't mean to get off on all that, but it's something that really should be said, and probably said a lot more. And so, we have here as, real quickly, I didn't tie that up, and I should tie that up. So, those who curse or diminish or belittle Abraham and his seed, he will curse. God will curse. And so now it's the word aror, coming from the word arar, that means to not only bind with a curse, but it's the idea of blocking or constricting or restricting. So basically, when we contrast it, a barakah, blessing, is sort of a life-giving energetic flow that's flowing down. A curse, as God's going to respond, is a cutting off or blocking, a blockage of that life-giving flow of energy, is basically what a curse is that it's talking about there. I want to bring something up here that you may or may not have noticed. In the book of Genesis, again, chapter 12, verse 5, it says, "And Abram took his wife Sarai and his nephew Lot." And we see that Lot is traveling with Abram here. And several times in this Torah portion, now we were already introduced to Lot at the end of the last Torah portion in Noah, but the narrative here, you'll notice, as you read through it, it'll be talking of, God will be speaking, or it'll be telling about something about the journeys of Abram, or Abraham at this time, or who will become Abraham, and it will drop some little something in about Lot, and it keeps happening. This happened several times. It says also in Genesis chapter 13, 1 and 2, so Abraham went up from Egypt and Lot with him. So it's like these little reminders along the way that Abraham's doing something, and oh, by the way, Lot's there. And so it's really trying to draw our attention to something and contrast these two figures of Abraham and Lot. Now, Lot is referred to in the New Testament. It calls him righteous. And Lot was a righteous man, but righteousness can be relative or subjective, because Lot wasn't that righteous compared to the righteousness of Abraham. And in fact, next week, as we get into more of the story of Lot in his escapades at Sodom, that he would have been toast completely if not for the intervention of his uncle Abraham. So without Abraham, Lot would have been complete toast. But compared to the people of Sodom where he dwelt, Lot was righteous. And so some of these things, we often think about righteous or unrighteous, and we can think of it that way sometimes, but many times there's a whole spectrum of this, from unrighteousness or unholy or profane, all the way to righteous and holy, very holy, and that sort of thing. Like the temple, we have the holy place, and then we have the holy of holies, the Kiddush Kiddushim, something extremely holy. So there's a whole spectrum of this stuff. And comparing Lot with Abraham, Lot was not nearly as righteous as Abraham, or holy as Abraham was. And so many times it's given us a hint here, something else real quick that it will mention. It will often refer, it'll be telling part of this narrative, and it'll say, and the Canaanites were in the land at that time. And then another place it'll say, and by the way, like particularly when Lot's herdsmen and Abraham's herdsmen were quarreling, it will mention something about, and by the way, there were the Canaanites and the Perizzites in the land at that time. And so often when you see that, it's going to portend some sort of trouble. I think it's also given us insight into, I did a video a while back that I think it was called the 7 Enemies of the Soul, that talked about the 7 inhabitants of the land of Canaan that the children of Israel were to go in and uproot, and so that they could fully possess the land. It's a picture of salvation. These journeys are a picture of the salvation of the soul, gives us a roadmap of the soul, which, by the way, the name Lot means veil, or something concealed or covered. A theme that I've talked about quite a bit, of this idea of concealing and revealing, that happens quite a bit in the scripture. It's the glory of God to conceal a thing, the honor of kings to search out of matter. Now, just like with proper synthesis or unholy mixtures, we can have positive veils or coverings, like holy things are to have a cover over them, and that's good and proper, and that's the proper order, the way things should be, as opposed to being uncovered or made bare or naked. In contrast, sometimes there can be negative covers or blockages, which Lot is representing here. And so I believe it's dropping these little breadcrumbs, or these little clues along the way in the story of, oh, and by the way, Lot's here with Abraham. And so I it doesn't tell us this in the text, but I believe that as we begin to sort of read between the lines, is that I don't think that this quarreling and what came to a head with Lot's people and Abraham's people just suddenly happened that day. Most of the time, that's not the way things work, of just suddenly blowing up without any warning. I think that this dynamic was sort of always there, probably from the time that he went out with them. But I think it grew and became untenable finally. And I suspect, although again the text doesn't tell us this, that probably Sarah was in Abraham's ear talking about, hey, this Lot is a problem and we need to get rid of him. And this is basically, I think this is a real important component of this story, is the Lot aspect of this. That Lot is a hindrance, Lot is a blockage to the fullness of the flow of blessing that is intended for Abraham. And so until Abraham dealt with this Lot problem, he couldn't fully enter into his destiny and into the fullness of what God had for him. And so in your life, there will be times, and I'm sure there has, and you'll probably be able to think of some of these, where there's people that are the Lot in your life that are preventing you from ascending, preventing you from reaching your fullest potential. They're holding you back. And so until you cut Lot out of your life and you go your separate ways, you're always going to be handicapped and hindered from reaching your full potential. And I think that Lot can represent people, or it could represent an inclination, a proclivity maybe that you have. So like a less evolved or less refined part of the self. So let's think of Abraham for a minute as more of the higher self, and Lot representing more of that lower nature. And so any time when we see often it will show us a contrast in the text. And once this thing came to a head and there's quarreling among Abraham's people and Lot's people, Abraham says, hey, okay, since we've got an issue here, I'm going to give you the opportunity, whatever you want, take it. If you choose to go right, I'll go left, or vice versa. And you choose what land you want, and I'll take what's left. I'll take the crumbs, pretty much. Which speaks very highly of Abraham, and it does not speak well of Lot, in my opinion. And I think it highlights the nature of their characters. That Abraham, although he was very wealthy, and maybe we can talk about that in a second, and Abraham, we have to remember, Lot went with Abraham. Abraham was really the one called out of Babylon, and then later called out of Haran, as this Torah portion begins. Lot was a interloper, basically someone who benefited from Abraham's relationship that went with him. Abraham, or I don't know that I would call Lot a hijacker, but maybe. I think that we see that a lot of times, that dynamic with people of that don't really necessarily contribute or build things, but are always trying to hijack something that other people's build and establish, and sort of get their tentacles in it and claim it for their own, or try to hijack it. Like I said, I've seen that quite a bit, and I'm sure you have too. And so in contrast to the benevolence and the just the kindness, Abraham is the epitome and representation of chesed, of mercy, of loving kindness, compassion. Lot is more driven by his lower nature, more self-centered, as we can see. So when Abraham gives him the choice, Lot chose the best for himself, and it happened to be an area toward Sodom. And so he keeps being drawn toward these negative forces, these negative locations, negative places. He keeps being drawn back to those ungodly, unrefined, undeveloped places. Sodom has this to do with this idea of ruin and devastation, similarly to one of the cities that's referenced in this Torah portion, Ai, or I, that means like a ruin, and it's contrasted with Bethel, or the house of God. And so it mentions a couple of times that Abraham is in between Ai and Bethel, the house of God, but he is camping toward Bethel, toward the house of God, in contrast to the way Lot seemed to continue to do, pitching his tent toward Sodom, and ultimately ends up dwelling right there in that space. And so it is, I believe, Lot can represent a person, or represent an attribute, a part of the self, of the lower nature, of the nefesh behema, or even the evil inclination, the yetzer hara, that is creating a problem so that the higher self can't fully connect to that flow of blessing and fulfill their destiny on the journey here. So probably all of us, myself certainly included, have Lot aspects within ourselves that need to be cut off, that there's some sort of connection there, a familial connection maybe, that maybe has been around for a long time, that we don't want to eliminate or cut off, but we really need to, in order to fulfill our purpose, the fullest potential that we have. That might be a good place to stop. There's a lot more in this Torah portion that we could get to, but I think I'll just leave it at that, and encourage you to go and read this entire Torah portion and take notice of a lot of these details, and ask yourself, are there people who are this Lot component in your life that may be holding you back? And again, I always try to look at the other hand, because the proclivity of most people that I run into, and I may have it too and be unconscious of it, I'm sure I probably do at times, but I really strive and I really try to practice objectivity and patience so that I don't just quickly jump to the right hand or the left hand. And so, because that usually is the way it is. But if we look at the scripture, and I know we've got some videos about paradox, if you just hone in on one thing, vanity of vanity, all is vanity. Okay, that's in the Bible. That's in the inspired Word of God. So is it true? Vanity of vanity, all is vanity? Yeah, it's true, but is it the totality of truth in all lines of time, in every situation? No. It's more or less subjective, or needs to be looked at contextual. It is true within a framework, within a set of dynamics or situation, but it's not true in all cases, because otherwise there would have been no reason for, it would have been a vanity for God to create the heavens and the earth and all that contain, to send his son, to send prophets, or to even be dealing with us. It'd be a vanity. Or it'd be a vanity for us to even be making videos talking about these Torah portions, or praying, or any good thing we do, if everything we do is vanity. So we have to look at it in the context that it's meant. And again, I've got a video on time you might like to look at that goes into some of these specifics. I'll try to remember to put a link to that as well. But in the scriptures, it talks about the sons of Issachar, one of the tribes of Israel, that they were gifted in knowing how to discern the times. So Ecclesiastes basically says that there's a time and season for every purpose under heaven. So we have to be discerning to determine, as the great philosopher Kenny Rogers saying, you got to know when to hold them and when to fold them, when to walk away, when to run. Basically, the Bible gives us a similar type of philosophy or theology as that it all depends upon the times and that we're dealing with. There's a time to plant, there's a time to reap, there's a time to embrace, there's a time to refrain, there's a time to speak, a time to stay silent, time for war, time for peace, time for love, time for hate. So any of those things could be right depending on the situation. If it's the right time, it's the right course of action. If you're in the wrong time, it's the absolute wrong thing. And so that is the danger of jumping on to one verse in the Bible and ignoring its counterpart that shows basically doing the exact opposite in a different situation. So with Lot, there are times where we have a Lot component that needs to be immediately cut out of our life. It's a negative influence that's draining us and blocking our relationship and the flow of divine energy to us, or even our congregation, etc. On the other hand, there may be people in our lives that are not necessarily contributing, or to where we're not really getting anything out of the relationship. Nevertheless, we may need to preserve those relationships and be there for those people. So it just entirely depends on the situation. And Yeshua talks about tending to the needs of the least of these, those that are thirsty and hungry and naked and in prison and sick and all of that. And so that's something we absolutely should do, and that's not just physical, that's also spiritual, providing spiritual water, spiritual sustenance, spiritual clothing, visiting those who are bound. So there's the physical component, which is true, also the spiritual component that is true. And so we want to do that, but also you can't help everyone, and there's people that you need to cut out of your life. And so again, it depends on the person, it depends on the situation, the dynamic, and so we have to pray and practice discernment to decide, is this a Lot situation where we need to cut this negative aspect out of our life, or is this something that we need to bear with and be patient and continue to try to cultivate a relationship with this person or with this aspect of ourselves? Is this a part of ourselves that could be rehabilitated and worked at and developed, like the alchemical process of turning lead into gold, or is it a cancer that needs to be immediately cut out and gotten rid of? Well, I hope that my exploration and study, I hope you've enjoyed today. I just had a lot of these thoughts and wanted to share them with you. If you have any thoughts about this or questions or comments, be sure and post them down below. And again, I'd like to remind you to take a moment and like the video, subscribe if you haven't already, and be sure and hit that notification bell. So hopefully we'll see you real soon. God bless you, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Take care now.
Hey, if you like this video, please click like and subscribe to be notified whenever we release new content, and to help other people find us out there on the vast plains of YouTube land. If you have a question or a topic you'd like for us to do a video about, just leave it in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching. Later, y'all.